One question that I really wish, we would ask ourselves a little bit more in the scheme of, public discourse is, what would we become without the moral fabric we have in our society? And not only that, but what is keeping that fabric in place? And, if you were to ask me, I would say nothing more than an abundance of fulfillment of our necessities, are what we need to drive, and an availability of resources that are really just redundant and, available for the purpose of over-indulgence and the hijacking of neurochemistry and so forth. You may have just heard me define a drug for you, but a drug of, a detriment, but that is essentially what you are ingesting when you're ingesting stuff like soda or chips, which you have in concentrations of salt and sugar that are beyond gratuitous. Now, with all our pretenses of how lovely of altruistic human society we are, we tend to lose the oversight that we could crumble at any second, and what are we going to lose when everything we need to sustain ourselves, everything we've been conditioned to learn, this is what we need to sustain ourselves, this is where we need to go, this is what we need to do to get the imperative for our survival, is stripped away from us. And especially in an era where essentially a second Cold War is on the horizon, and a potential nuclear Armageddon, well, hey, fears have kind of been reinstated. I think this is essentially a film that should strike into the core of anyone who sees it the real lurking terror that is nuclear Armageddon. And now I'm someone who tends to pride himself on having a fairly disturbing array of horror films. This is a very hard watch here. It's like the opposite of Mindhunter. You go into the mind of a serial killer and you hear him kind of reenact his sort of how he justifies his violence towards those he impacts. Pulse, which is a great delirium-inducing Japanese film on essentially ghosts using the internet to reach the world of the living, creating a very strange sort of an apocalypse, or Climax, The Changeling. And it wasn't up until yesterday when I saw Threads that this fell out of my number one, because Come and See is a very similar sort of existential horror in that lost in the fervor of battle, and it's displacing rectitude destroying effects, the emergence of primitive traits, primitive desires, and wanton longings to get some sort of revenge on whatever oppressive force is doing this to us. Because this film is something that, unlike the Reich, which is traumatizing and persecuting these people on the road to Stalingrad, essentially. This is something that would indiscriminately render us all helpless and all into essentially regressed hominids, like nuclear Armageddon would realistically do. Now, what I like about Threads, several things, is that for one, it's not taking like a Mad Max style approach to it. It's not, okay, nuclear Armageddon we have an excuse for people to act like complete deplorables and just, rape, kill one another. That is more so just a setting that is an excuse for those kind of like errant behaviors to happen. Whereas in this, it is more so an exploration of, oh, this is why that would happen. This is a very cold, calculated portrayal of how we get there. It fills in that nuance, that deep, like satiating desire, the deep insatiated desire for an explanation as to how, say, those bikers, became so randy for raping people on Mad Max. Like, this is more so a regression of society when resources, communication, technology, creature comforts are completely stripped from us in one go. Now, this film is very interesting in how it's made. It's kind of got this mockumentary quality to it, but it seems like a very rigid clinical portrayal of things. And you have a very loose story following kind of a few generations of these characters, but they're really just only a placemat. So, they're going about, well, the information as to what is really important in the beats that need to be hit in the story just kind of are fed in and orbit around them until you get this nuclear blast which renders everything into a completely different world. And I gotta say, the suspense is unreal, because going in, that's gonna happen. These people are gonna be shredded, afflicted with radiation sickness, radiation burns, become very much like a Hikiko Mori. I don't know if I'm butchering that. I could be butchering that. Essentially the Japanese who are afflicted by the Hiroshima bomb and were subsequently scorned by their society. Good job. Good job, Japan, there. It's only your own people getting hit by a nuke. But I digress. So, and also I gotta say, the detail that is used when conveying these the series of events, the trajectory of, up to the fall, after the fall, beyond impressive. Like, listen to this. So, the Soviet Union, fearing the return of a Shah regime following the alleged U.S.-backed coup, occupies northern Iran, with the United States subsequently mobilizing its own forces and occupying the south, as well as increasing its naval presence in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. then deploys B-52 bombers to Turkey when it learns the Soviet Union has moved nuclear warheads into Mashhad. The British Army reinforces NATO forces in Western Europe following the news of a Warsaw Pact buildup in East Germany. The President of the United States attempts to resolve the situation in Iran peacefully by proposing a joint withdrawal to the Soviet leader. The Soviets, however, ignore the ultimatum, resulting in a conventional attack by U.S. bombers on the Soviet base at Mashhad. The Soviets retaliate with a nuclear-tipped air defense missile system, which is in turn countered with the detonation of an American tactical nuke over Mashhad. A naval engagement subsequently breaks out in the Persian Gulf, further escalating tensions. In response, the U.S. blockades Cuba, and anti-Soviet riots break out in American cities. Now, this is it. Everything has come to a head. You're watching people in Britain no longer able to be oblivious to what is happening. They are just letting out all that pent-up anxiety and paranoia within irrational behaviors like panic buying, looting, just hysteria and pandemonium. And those are becoming the colors of society. And, bear in mind, you're just waiting for this bomb to drop. And then, as surely it was written, at 8:30 a.m. on Thursday, May 26th in Britain, attack warning red is transmitted. Minutes later, a high-altitude nuclear explosion occurs over the North Sea, essentially an EMP. detonating high in the atmosphere wipes out the electronics grid, essentially, and cripples communications across Britain and northwestern Europe. But this is only a breath from the beast, because you just see sort of the conductors and everything crackle out, but the people, probably pelted with radiation, are otherwise feeling okay until one of the NATO military targets near Sheffield, RAF Finningley Air Force Base, is hit by a detonation, and a mushroom cloud is seen from Sheffield, and the city is now immersed in complete oblivion. You see this higher class lady, very well put together, very independent looking, just staring with urine streaming down her leg. Just a perfect allegorical portrayal of how everything we have built up and sustained over our existence is stripped away in that very moment. And this is really like this is one of those films where you think this can't get any worse. But then you see the fallout, and you see the radiation sickness it's inducing in just about everyone. And this is very nuanced. As I said, you see 10 years go by. You watch as this dark ages is induced, where without our technology, our communication, our creature comforts, we are reduced to scavenging farmers, essentially. But because of a mass reduction in the ozone layer, which has just been scalped by the splits of missiles, it makes simple activities like farming, just a very, very sensitive area, because you are essentially exposing yourself to more exposure of radiation with that reduction in the atmosphere to insulate you from it. Without that presence in the atmosphere to insulate you, you are exposed to stuff like cataracts and skin cancer, and without regular farming tools, this makes cultivation of crops very, very difficult. And it's fascinating. You watch as people just regress, and like I said, it's not just people fighting. You see the government, who has been, essentially being granted the right to exercise capital punishment. You see them kill some kids and stuff who are stealing. You see sort of rape occur. You see lack of education and so forth. And interestingly enough, the dialect, the cadence, the syntax, it all changes. You hear a new kind of British by the end of it, because of, unconventional teaching styles, unconventional teaching locations, and so on and so forth. But it is bleak, and the last few shots are some of the most seemingly pessimistic portrayals I've seen they're pessimistic culminations I've seen in a film. Last few images leave you with, my God, I'm not going to spoil it, but when you know what I'm talking about, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I think this is great. This is existential horror down to the definition, because you got existential horror can therefore be defined as the dread and terror experienced by the individual realizing the circumstances of their existence. This translates in movies to fear of isolation, uncertainty, meaninglessness, insignificance, oblivion, responsibility, and inevitability. All things touched upon heavily within this film. And I think some of this film may strike people as unnecessarily cynical, but again, with what I said about, us very much being dictated by our social constructs, our behavior being essentially just layers of what we can do in a realm of opulence and fruition, where we can live relatively unimpeded. You take all that away, and cynicism is the law. it is the natural forces, because you look at life out in nature. It is unforgiving. It is bleak. It is nihilistic, and this film is not trying to be that way. It's trying to give you a play-by-play of what would happen in such circumstances, and I think that's truly laudable. I think that's very impressive, because they could have gone in the direction of The Day After, where people sort of band together for the good of humanity and try to overcome things. Likely, not so much. So sometimes cynicism, and this is like what I feel with stuff like depression and pessimism, where it does allow you to see the reality, the gritty reality, whether you like it or not, of what's going on in the world, whereas people who live in sort of bubbles of optimism are tethered to ideas that are not quite centered in reality. But this uncompromisingly shows you just what for if a nuke should be detonated in this fashion, if an exchange should occur. And again, this is relevant today with a sort of the imminent conflict that's emanating from Ukraine, Russia, and then the discontent of this in response from the West. It very much does seem like another Cold War is imminent. But yeah, and why I keep bringing up this Mad Max example when I'm talking about this film is because that's an example of not going overboard with cynicism, not making it a stage for characters just to do the worst possible and to overindulge in that violence, that mayhem, that sexual depravity. No, this is essentially giving you a clinical play-by-play, and for that, it feels like an educational film in a school straight out of a nightmare, really. And it's this kind of horror which truly makes you feel like you are a species on the chopping block, and you're just waiting for that. You're just waiting for the, what do they call them? The chopping part of the block. Abattoir. You're waiting for that abattoir to drop. So, I just want to say, very, very highly recommend this. You can watch the whole movie on YouTube. And relevant more than ever, and scary more than just about anything else I think you could watch. Come and See does come very close, because that is essentially a retelling of events that most likely did happen, and probably did happen in many places throughout World War II and World War I. But this is less concentrated, so it is therefore more scary, because it would be happening absolutely everywhere. And one thing though that I would fault the movie with is they don't really emphasize enough how, with such a reduction in population, there is no like virtually no way we could sustain ourselves, get those population numbers back up, so it would be an end for all things. But yeah, anyways, I wanted to give you guys that because I had a tremendous time watching that yesterday. It scared the daylights out of me. It was beyond bleak. Only recommend it to the hardcore veterans of horror, or actually, you know what? I recommend it to everyone, because we need to stop living in illusion when it comes to the imminent threats of things like nuclear warfare, and we also need to realize just how potentially transient these skins of social niceties and whatnot can really be when it comes to the demise of our society, the demise of circumstances where we can operate from a place of care, compassion for others, and not absolute drive to make the little bit we need to survive throughout the day as an animal, not a human being. Anyways, that being said, I forgot to say comment, like, subscribe at the beginning again, because I always do that. But anyways, you know the drill. Do it. Please do it. Okay. Watch that movie too. It's on YouTube. Threads. Enjoy.